Today my guest is E Lockhart. How are you doing, Emily? It's great to see you.
I'm very well. Thanks for having me on.
I think for context for people, I think we first met when I invited you to do a session at NCTE about books kind of connected to The Catcher in the Rye. And I think we talked about the influences of Catcher, and we really spent some time talking about the disreputable history of Frankie Landau-Banks, which is a fantastic book. So why don't you tell people a little bit about that book? Because I don't know if it's being pushed, but boy, it should be, especially with some of the other notoriety that you're getting.
Well, I was actually at an event in Kansas City, Missouri last week, and an English teacher came up to me and said that he had been taught disreputable history in, when he was learning to be an educator, and then now he uses it with his students all the time. And that was a really lovely
Oh,
comment. So yeah, somebody's still teaching it.
good. That's so good to hear.
Well, I think the reason that you are connecting Disreputable History of Frankie Landau-Banks, which is a book of mine from 2008, to Catcher in the Rye, is because they're both about boarding school.
Yeah.
And they're also both about kids who are operating in a somewhat gray area of morality while trying to figure themselves out.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. I mean, one of the papers um, that still goes unwritten in my mind is I'd really like to write a paper about books written by females about boarding schools. I think there's several of them out there that are really, really good. And I think it creates a liminal space for kids to explore. Really, in some ways, the parents are gone, they're on their own, they can create an identity and react to the world in interesting ways, which certainly Frankie does. So I think that was my impulse. It's one of those ideas that think, okay, if there's enough world and time, that's a paper I should write. Right? Do that.
Well, I
So how
always
did
loved
that book
boarding.
come about? Did you do any
Oh,
boarding schools or anything like that?
I didn't go to boarding school. I went to college. But I loved boarding school books even as an elementary aged reader. I remember reading Ursula Nordstrom's book, The Secret Language.
Mm.
And if your viewers don't know, Ursula Nordstrom was a legendary editor who wrote there's this amazing book of her letters called Dear Genius, which I'm sure you've
Oh,
read. Um, and she edited Sendak and all these other amazing picture book and middle grade writers. And she wrote one novel herself, which was called The Secret Language, which was set at boarding school, but it's about like 8-year-olds at boarding school.
oh, young kids, yeah.
Yeah. And I loved that book growing up. And I also loved a Catholic school boarding school book called Lovey and the Girls. And I forget
Oh,
who wrote that book, but I have vivid, vivid memories of it. It's high time I looked that up. But
yeah,
boarding school occupied a big part of my imagination. And I think it's for exactly the reason that you articulated, which is that, young adult literature is about, among other things, the separation from the family of origin, and the questioning that starts to happen in young adulthood of the institutions that are shaping your life up to that point. And that might be your family, and it might be your church, and it might be your sports teams, and it might be your school, and it might be your town and the values of your town, or your dystopian society, whatever that is.
yeah,
But the moment of thinking, oh, maybe these people are not right. Maybe I don't align myself with these values. Maybe I need to go and find my own values. And a boarding school story, because the characters are already separated from their family of origin, is like a wonderful, and because the institutional pressures are even stronger than they
yeah.
would be if you were going to day school, it's a great kind of story space for that emergence of an identity separate from the institution.
Yeah, I love that explanation because I think it perfectly contextualizes, I would argue, why maybe the text of young adult literature is The Catcher in the Rye. And there's a lot of books before that, but they tend to be what I would call juvenile fiction or caught up in serialized fiction. Not that some of them aren't great, right? But I think there was a sea change when The Catcher in the Rye hit about adults paying attention to the ways in which books about adolescence can be serious, right?
Mm.
Not that we haven't had that before. I'm always questioning people who don't, um, see Dickens and some of these things as really dealing with adolescence and childhood in sophisticated ways as well. But anyway, that's great. So, how did you become the writer of young adult literature instead of a professor of Victorian studies? I mean, you had the option to go either way, right?
I did a PhD in English literature, yes, and you're remembering correctly, 19th century British novel. I was really unhappy in the halls of academia by the time I finished. Um, I loved school and going to school, and I signed up to go to graduate school because I wanted more of that.
Mm,
Um, but I think I didn't really understand the end game of the PhD being that I would then move to a different city, leave my family behind, and publish academic journal articles.
mhm.
And when that future came into focus, I thought, oh no, that is no, no, thank you. I was living in New York City. I was married by the time I graduated. I was just not gonna, I wasn't having it. Um, so at some point during that grad school education, I started writing creatively as a way of kind of wrenching myself off of this path that I had gotten myself onto.
Yeah. So what was first? What did you write first as you were doing that?
Um, oh gosh, I wrote a bunch of things that were published, but that never really had any great success. I wrote a middle grade novel. I wrote a book of essays. I wrote one adult novel. I wrote two picture books. And at
Huh?
that point, I had published 5 books and finished the doctorate. And I was kind of nowhere. Like I did not
Yeah.
have a career. My editors kept leaving the publishing houses. I didn't have any like long, consistent relationship with any one editor at that point. And I had changed agents twice, and I was on my third agent. And so I was just like, clearly I'm doing this wrong, right? You're supposed, by the time you have 5 books, you're supposed to have like developed something that somebody would call a career. But I had not. And I remember saying to my agent, look, I was teaching all over town, right? So
Yeah.
I was teaching freshman comp at Barnard and at NYU and at Columbia. And and it was just, it was 3 classes, but at 3 different places. And I
Yeah.
was always, there's a lot of transportation going on and a lot of grading papers and
Yeah.
a
Too
lot of
much
prep
grading.
for 3 different versions of always a freshman comp class. And which I liked, by the way. Like I like teaching freshmen. Like that
Yeah.
was kind of a joy. Like they were, bright and bushy
They're
tailed.
great. It's just the grading and the three different masters could be difficult as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, it was just there was no time in my day, in my week. So I said, look, I think I need to teach less and write more. Could I ghostwrite something? Could I help somebody who's writing a cookbook? Could I, go write a Nancy Drew? What could I do where I would be getting better at writing, and writing professionally and making contacts and kind of understanding publishing and continuing my career while I try to figure out what my next book should be and all of that. And she came back to me a week later and she said that there was an editor at Random House who was like one of the 4 people who'd read my adult novel.
Yeah.
And this editor liked my adult novel and was looking for a very specific type of book, which was basically Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, but cheeky and
Uh,
edgy. Um, so, because Sisterhood, if your viewers haven't
yeah. Yeah.
read, I'm sure they've heard of it, but if you
Yeah.
haven't read it, it's it's about four girls who share a sort of semi-magical pair of pants that fits them all perfectly, but it's not
Right.
very magical. It's really mostly a realistic story about their friendship with this high concept of these pants, and that you sort of follow the pants as they get mailed from girl to girl over one
Yeah.
summer. But it's pretty, like, it's very heartfelt. It's really good. It's very, it's only very gently funny. So I think they wanted something that was high concept, but funnier,
Oh, yeah.
a little more, I don't know, with a little more, I'm not sure what they really meant by edgy, but I tried to deliver it. And I wrote this book proposal for the boyfriend list, and they gave me a 2-book deal.
Yeah.
So then suddenly I was like, oh, a 2-book deal. Who knew that even existed? Um, so I suddenly was launched on a career that was going to have 2 books.
Yeah.
And so I wrote the heck out of the boyfriend list. And it was also very clear to me that, by the time I was about halfway through it, that it was a better book than any of the other books I had written. Like, I was just in a sweet spot where what I was good at was coming into play, and things that I cared about were themes that I was able to write about. And so, I never looked
And
back.
you had enough writing experience that you kind of knew you'd hit a stride that you hadn't hit before.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And those have done really well. The boyfriend list books is a has done really well. So where does that take place? How many of those did you finish before you switched to the Frankie Landau book? Is there how many years distance
Um,
between that?
the boyfriend list came out in 2005,
Okay.
and Frankie Landau-Banks, I think, came out in 2008.
Eight.
So
Yeah,
it
that
was, but
sounds right.
that was a lot of books though.
Yeah.
I did the 2 boyfriend list books plus Fly on the Wall,
Uh-huh.
and then I did Drama Rama. So I think, wait, right? So that's
It's,
4. So Disreputable History would have been my 5th YA
yeah, so you're hitting once you found that stride, you're hitting a book a year
for a
and
while.
hitting
I
them
was.
for doing that. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Before we jump into the We Were Liars thing, I would like you to talk a little bit about Whistle
Oh,
as well. So how did that come about, and um, how's that doing in the world? Because I think it's fascinating.
oh, thank you. Whistle, for people who don't know, is a graphic novel that I wrote for DC Comics. And I invented a new superhero called Whistle, who lives and fights crime in Gotham City, which, if
Yeah.
you don't know, is where Batman lives. And so it is riddled with very exciting supervillains. And I got to use those DC Comics villains in the book. The book did not do that great, I'm going to say. Like, I
Really?
did a lot. I had a really fun time I did a ton of press from um, about it being her being a Jewish superhero. My dad is Jewish, my mom is not, my husband is Jewish. I operate sort of as a secular Jewish person, but
Uh,
not as a religious person. So the book is very much in that lane, and a lot of it is about this neighborhood that I invented in Gotham City. Um, that is basically New York City's Lower East Side,
uh,
transposed into Gotham City
yeah.
and given a waterfront location, which means that it is ripe for gentrification and also supervillainy. So I am really, like, my grandparents, my great grandparents came over from Eastern Europe to the Lower East Side in around 1910 or so, and spoke Yiddish, and ended up moving to the Bronx and owning a grocery store. But that history of Jewish people in the Lower East Side is something that I have written about before in other contexts, and it's really interesting. And this was a chance
Yeah.
for me to, like, make this fictionalized version of it and have a superhero protecting it. Um,
Yeah.
and my dad lived sort of right on the edges of it when I was growing up, and so forth. So it really started with the neighborhood and thinking about, oh, I could make a neighborhood in Gotham City and kind of make that my own.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of Jewish press for it, and the love for the book was really big and heartfelt. from that community, and that was really delightful. But it came out during the pandemic, and there were a lot of changes at DC Comics. So sometimes, a book that you loved writing, or if you're a reader, a
Uh-huh.
book that you loved reading might not be, selling a ton of copies, and it might have very little to do with the merit of the book, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, well, there was a pandemic, or, oh, well, there were changes at the publisher. And that can affect the sales of a book. And that was what
Oh
happened.
yeah,
And you just,
big
as the
time.
writer, you just take a deep breath and say, okay.
Yeah, I sometimes wish there was a kind of a reboot of that year, because I can think of a lot of books. Another one that comes to mind is Gay Polsner's, Jack Kerouac is Dead to Me. I think is
Oh, I
another
haven't
one
read
that
that.
came out during that time, and I thought, oh, it's fantastic, but it didn't get play. She couldn't do the tours, and I think, oh man, it's one of those things. So that makes sense when you say that about Whistle, that I tracking the time. But sometimes books come to me as somebody who reviews them and writes about them, and I get them, so I'm not aware that I didn't have to go out and get it or find it, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes I get that blessing. So let's go into the world that's throwing you into Prime Video a little bit. Two books are out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the We Were Liars, and which for some reason that title hit me right from the beginning, and then you follow it up a little bit later with Family of Liars, and then coming out. So over this last decade now, because it came out in 2014, you have We Fell Apart. So tell me the origin. Did you just start like any book and you had the idea and you came? Because I'm really interested in how such a fantastic book like We Were Liars came into the world.
I mean, mostly the way a book comes into the world is a little bit of a mystery, even to the writer, right? You sit down in your office, like this is my office behind me, and it's very mundane, and you're on the internet and you answer your emails and you do whatever else it is you do on the internet, and then you're like, okay, now I'm going to write, and then I don't know, you type some stuff and then things come out of your brain that you didn't know were going to come out of your brain, and you feel lucky. Um, it is a mysterious process, and We Were Liars. I set out um, to write a thriller, which I had not done before.
Hmm.
And I wanted it to still have comic elements to it, especially around the friendship between the four liars of the title. So it's set on a private island off the coast of Massachusetts. And there are four teenagers who spend every summer there. Three of them are related to each other, they're cousins. And one is a kid who's an outsider to their family, but who gets invited there every summer for various reasons.
Yeah,
And so the humor comes from the four of them just being teenagers, kind of up to getting in trouble on this island. And then the thriller plot is that, there's a whole amnesia plot involving
right. Yeah, it's
um
it's very interesting. It has a lot of really complex elements, and I guess that we shouldn't give away too much. We should just tell people to read it and watch the Prime Video thing that comes out on June 18th. It'll be exciting. But were you intentional about all the illusions? Because I've heard you talk about this before, because some people will say King Lear, but you go way back to even pre influences from fairy tales with these things. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or what are some of the
um,
influences?
well, I tend to be a very referential writer, and I'm always drawing from literary sources, uh kind of no matter what genre I'm
Yeah,
writing in. But with We Were Liars, yes, there is a premise of a patriarch with three beautiful daughters, like the princesses in a fairy tale. And, in these kinds of stories, like King Lear or like Cinderella or Beauty and the Beast, there when there are three daughters, usually two are good and one is bad, or the other way around, right?
Yeah.
Two are bad and one is good, but the one who's singled out as bad is actually usually secretly good, right? So
Yeah.
Cinderella is no good, right? Except for that she is the good one. Cordelia is no good, except for that she is the good one, and so on.
Yeah.
So I was interested in I think that's a universal, that families put labels on groups of children within the family, that somebody's the sporty one, somebody's the pretty one, somebody's the brainy one, somebody's the trouble one. And I think that often in families from all kinds of backgrounds, siblings compete with one another for parental favor, and sometimes for resources.
Yeah.
So I was interested in those kinds of fairy tales that start that way. Once upon a time, there was a man who had three daughters, and in writing my own version of that. And the fairy tales thread through Family of Liars, the prequel to We Were Liars, and
Yeah.
also through We Fell Apart. But
Yeah.
each book uses the fairy tales in a different way.
Yep, absolutely. It's so the setting, were you somebody who summered in on the beach and those kinds of things, or is that another of your childhood inspired by reading and things that you just notice through coming on?
Well, I was a scholarship kid at some very fancy educational institutions for a lot of my life. And so I always had one foot in and one foot out of this kind of
Mm,
privileged world. And that was not always a comfortable place to be,
I can imagine. Yeah.
but it was a great gift to my imagination. And I think that as a novelist, if you are one foot in and one foot out of some kind of world, that is a great place from which to write about it. So in We Were Liars, the narrator is right in the middle of her very, very privileged family that owns this private island. But the boy that she falls in love with, he is a kid of Indian heritage, whereas her family is like old money white Democrats.
Yeah.
He's of Indian heritage. He's a New Yorker. He's a middle class kid. He's, kind of an academic. He's very ambitious. So he has a lot of, even though he's a boy and he's of Indian heritage, which are very different from me. He's also got a lot of lived experience that's similar to mine, right?
Yeah.
Being the kid who's always got his hand up in class, talks too much, does all the reading. That was me, right? Being the person with one foot in and one foot out of privileged environment. That was also me. Right.
Yeah.
So very often, there's a character in my books who has that position. It's true in The
Yeah.
Book List. It's true in Disreputable History, Frankie Landau-Banks. It's true in Fly on the Wall. It's true. It's certainly true in We Fell Apart, and so on. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's an
That's
interesting
fascinating.
thing to me.
So what can you tell us about when are trailers going to hit for this for We Were Liars?
Oh, Mr. Bickmore, the trailer is out.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's good.
There's a teaser trailer that you can, if you Google We Were Liars trailer,
It
you'll see the
comes
teaser
up.
trailer come right up on YouTube and, and TikTok and Instagram and all of that. And the full trailer will be out. I actually don't know, but in a week or two from when
Yeah,
we're
good.
recording this.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll for everybody, we'll prep this interview so that we have links in it, so that when
Oh,
you come
wonderful.
home, people can pause and hit the link and say, okay, if we do that, because sometimes I take 6 weeks or so to do this, but because this is coming out, I will have this up by the end of the month, so that
Oh, awesome.
we can get it going. It seems so timely to do that. I got to mention Genuine Fraud, because Genuine Fraud, I think, came out a year or two after We Were Liars, and
Yeah.
yeah, I liked what you did with that too. In fact, that's one of the things that's fascinating, has been fascinating for me about you as a writer is you keep surprising me either in kind of the tone or the genre. And I can see, there's clearly similarities in an E Lockhart book, but Genuine Fraud was really clever as well. Now, was there a idea for that, or is that just another one? You're in that office again and beautiful ideas come.
Um, there are a lot of literary references for Genuine Fraud. And the biggest is Patricia Highsmith's The Talented Mr. Ripley. So
Yeah.
if you are a Ripley fan, you will be able to see those parallels. I would call it like an homage to The Talented Mr. Ripley. And at the same time, I layered in a lot of superhero references. If you are a superhero geek, there's a ton of that all threaded through. And there's also a lot of that Victorian novel education that I had. It's an orphan story. It's about
Yeah.
orphans kind of making good. It's Great Expectations. It's, that kind of vibe, Jane Eyre, et cetera, et cetera. So there's actually quite a lot of that up on the surface of Genuine Fraud. One of the characters is kind of obsessed with orphan stories and talks through her obsession, so that you can sort of see that theme easily.
Yeah, is there, and I on one of the copies I have of Genuine Fraud, I think Karen McManus writes a blurb for it. And for those of you people who don't know this book, it fits in perfectly with that kind of book as well. The one of us is lying kind of stories. I think you're in good company with those kinds of books. And for people who know McManus but don't know yours, they need to drift over here to read Genuine Fraud, I think. So I think that was another great find. That's another one. I think somebody took a picture of me at NCTE one year, and I was in the back row reading Genuine Fraud instead of paying attention to anything else.
Thank you.
I had to say, okay, I've got to get this under my belt as soon as I can. So now some of the difficult questions for people who want to be writers. You already mentioned that the journey was a little tough. You had some books that didn't quite take. So what does a writing day look like for you? How do you get yourself up? And especially if you're not in the middle of something, how do you start fresh? What does the life look like?
I mean, honestly, most of the time it looks very ordinary, like a
Mhm.
perfectly ordinary writing day. I would probably, sit down around 9 in my office and usually write until noon or 1. And then I would take a break. And then there's a lot of admin. There's a lot, we all have paperwork. And when you are your own boss, there's
Yeah.
a lot of it. So I'd say at least half my day is taken up with admin. But but it's still a very nice job. I'm not
Yeah.
really complaining. Um, Sometimes I have a side project. So sometimes part of that writing day, I'll be writing on another project. And sometimes there's copy edits or some kind of fine tuning that needs to happen to something. So, I'll just be drafting an initial book for a couple hours of the day.
Yeah.
And then the next portion of the writing brain time is used in a copy edit or a page proof or revision of one section that needs redoing or
Yeah.
something like that.
So in like many, you probably have something that you're trying to get generated and going and finishing, and then you have something where you might be reading page proofs or the final revisions of something. So when
Yeah.
you're doing something new, do you set a word count goal, an hour, 2 hours I'm on this, or I'm working for 1,000 words, or how do you trick
I often
yourself into?
set a word count goal, and fail. But sometimes I can't. Like today I had 70 minutes. It
Yeah,
already happened. I wrote 676 words.
yeah,
That was pretty good for 70 minutes. Like
yeah, I would say. Yeah,
and I just have to, that is not my, my word count goal for the week is all messed up because that is not enough for the day, but that's all I have today. So,
yeah,
I just, Sometimes it's on a plane, sometimes it's, in a coffee shop. Sometimes it's I run around to meetings and I take my laptop and I sit down for 45 minutes somewhere and write. I wouldn't get the books done if I was waiting for a
Yeah.
beautiful centered time in my office. That ideal work day happens less frequently than you might think.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, I can appreciate that, right? Um I never envisioned myself being the academic. That was kind I wanted to train teachers, right? And so when I saw that as a thing, but I told my friends when I went to LSU to start, I said, well, if I'm back in 3 years, it simply means I can't write. It doesn't, I can't publish. It doesn't mean I didn't like the weather, I didn't like the food. It means I can't figure out how to do what I like and publish enough so that they're happy, right? But
Mhm.
that was the way I used to try to say, if I could do 2 days, let's say pick Tuesday and Thursday and get 6 hours in each of those days, and again, it's like working on several projects, maybe, right? And maybe out of those 6 hours, two or three were really good writing, and the rest was housekeeping around the projects, right? That you can
Yeah.
do. So I appreciate that. When you go back the next day, do you reread to where you are? Do you give yourself a kind of starting point, or how do you go back to a text that you're developing?
I think in a good writing flow, I would probably go back to the previous day's work only, because
Mhm.
you can spend a lot of time rewriting your stuff, and sometimes you have to because you did not set up your story well enough. But if you can just go like do a little rewriting of just yesterday's work to fine tune it, but also just to get yourself going, right?
Yeah,
Kind of get up to speed and then generate your word count for the day. That's more efficient. But
yeah.
I very often at some point, usually maybe halfway or two-thirds through, realize that there's all sorts of stuff that I need to layer back in earlier. So sometimes I'm getting my word count goal by writing something that goes up near the beginning of the story. You know what I mean? And just inserting it there. Or sometimes I'm getting my word count goal by jumping ahead in the story and writing some crucial thing that happens at the end so that I kind of have a lighthouse to
Yeah, and you got a good vision of it going. That's really fascinating. So you have a vision in your mind of what the book is. So is it plotted or outlined, or you just kind of have a vision and you write as you go?
it changes book to book. It does. I mean, the book I'm writing right now, I do not know how it ends. I really don't. I really do not. I know some more stuff that happens that I haven't written yet, but I don't know how it ends. And so it's a very it's an intuitive book. It's a book of my heart. It's a book that's coming up, just because uh there's something that happens in this book very early in the story. And I told this thing to my wonderful friend Sarah Mlanovsky, with whom I have
Yeah.
done a lot of projects, and she's an amazing YA writer, very, very funny.
Oh, yeah.
She said, Emily, no, 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 that is not gonna, nobody's gonna like that. That is not, I love you, but like that is not what should happen. That no. And I said, but it already happened. I was like, it's already happened. That's what's happened. I can't, I'm not, and of course it hasn't already happened. I mean, I could go back and change the whole thing. I totally could. But the way I felt with this particular book was I can't help it. That's what happens. That's what happens.
Fascinating. That's great. It'll be interesting to see what Sarah thinks when you get a full draft then, right?
Well, she's always very supportive. She
Yeah.
just she speaks her mind, but she is a wonderful critic. And she reads a lot of my stuff in draft and helps me make it better.
Yeah, well, if people don't know, you two have done a lot of things together and presented together. And if anybody ever gets a chance to see the two of you presenting together at a conference, they should jump on it because you
Oh,
two are a hoot together. It's a really good combination to see the two of you talking. And I talk to some writers who say they're compelled to finish the book, right? And you talk about going back and writing some and doing this, but I've talked to a few that, boy, their first goal is to get something done, right? And I said, well, what have those big ideas come in? You say, oh, I need to tweak this minor character, or these two characters need to be the same character, and they say, well, they leave notes, but and they'll go back and put notes, but they're driven to finish a draft rather than to go back and edit. And so they're constantly making those notes. And one of the things that's been fascinating for me over these 50 some interviews is how you guys are all different, right? There's different ways in which you approach the task. So let's go to you've got something, you're proud of it, your writing team or whoever's looked at it, and you've sent it to the editor and you think, thank goodness that's done. And then it comes back right? With
It always comes back.
pages and pages of notes. How do you approach that? Do you try to hit it right away and get into it and go through all the notes and reconcile your agreements and disagreements? How does that revision process go for you?
Well, I have to say, the thing that I really want to remark on is not my revision process, but the kind of feedback that I get. Because I
Good.
think that a lot of teachers and editors have the urge to give pages and pages of notes, imagining that pages and pages of their very careful, well-informed, thoughtful ideas and critiques are going to empower the writer to move forward. And they're spending huge amounts of time writing these letters or marking up a piece of paper. And the result is that the writer feels completely overwhelmed and doesn't feel empowered, feels instead unable to go forward because the task of revision is so enormous. And at some level, it seems like the editor or even the teacher's faith in the writer is not really there. So for many years, I had a wonderful editor named Beverly Horowitz, who just retired from Penguin Random House. And Beverly has edited Louis Sacker and Judy Blume and many, many other amazing, amazing writers. And Beverly instead, first of all, she talks to me about what it is I am trying to make.
Oh,
And I think that if you are teaching a student or editing a professional writer, saying, what are you making here, right? Is this a tragedy? Is this a comedy? Is this a thriller? What is, I see this theme going through. Like, is there something you want to say? Or if you don't know what you want to say, maybe just the thing you want to explore, the messiness of this theme. I see that theme. I see this other theme, right? Maybe you want to push harder and develop those themes that I'm seeing if you agree that they're there, right?
yeah.
See what they made and
Yeah.
ask them how they want to build it, right? To see what they made and recognize it, right?
Right.
And then she would give me like 2, maximum 3 big picture notes, right? I'm more upset about the dogs than I am about the people. Okay. Okay, right? I
Yeah.
have got to work on that, right?
Yeah.
I can figure out how to do that. I don't need
Yeah.
her writing all over my manuscript. That's a big picture note, right?
Yeah.
This love story, I lose track of it for part on the manuscript, and then it picks up again over here, right? I think maybe it needs more complications and more physicality in order to really get us attached to this love story, right? That's a big picture note,
Yeah.
right? You don't have to write all over somebody's thing and make them feel all upset about all your red pen, right?
Oh, amen to that.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think 2 or maximum 3 big picture notes combined with seeing the thing that they are making.
Yeah.
I'm, like describing it, right? This feels like, you know, a super atmospheric, dark academia thriller, or this feels like, you know, a beautiful, bright, sparkly cupcake of a comedy, right? Is that where you're going? Yes? No. Okay. You
Yeah.
want to actually have a cupcake of a comedy mixed with acerbic social criticism. Okay. That's what we're going towards. Okay. So now we both agree that this is what you're making. Um, that is,
Well,
I,
she sounds like a great editor for you for those kinds of things. I think that that's probably one of the secrets in the publishing world is getting an editor and an author that see the world the same way or that can communicate effectively that way. That so when you get those big notes, do you go page by page looking for that, or does it often kind of a revelatory experience where you say, "Oh yeah, I think I know where she's talking about, where I," and then you kind of know intuitively which part of the book to go look at, or do you kind of plod through it again?
I mean, very often I dive in and I say, oh, I'm going to do this and this and this. And I do the biggest picture things. But
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of like sort of self-directed, fine tooth comb editing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I will say, okay, now I'm going to do a pass on We Fell Apart, for example. There's a relationship between the main character, Matilda, and her brother, Mir.
Yeah.
And I knew it wasn't quite deep enough and rich enough and complex enough to have what happens between them near the end be impactful.
Okay.
So I did a pass where I wasn't writing whole new scenes, but like every time Mir showed up, I looked at the scene and I thought, can he talk a little more? Can he reveal himself a little more? Can I show how Matilda feels about him a little more?
Yeah.
You know, maybe sometimes I would add a little mini fight and then they would break up. But it wasn't changing the whole, not break up, but like make up the fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I wasn't necessarily changing the whole arc of of their sibling relationship, but I was just going through the whole book and deepening every single time they were together.
Yeah. And some of the the book involves for the main character Matilda a lot of unknowns, right? There's a lot of mystery for her. So I can imagine you going through and saying, okay, what does she know now, or what does she think she knows, and reading it for that kind of take as well through the book, because you want to give her pieces, but you don't want to. Yeah,
Right.
I loved it. I mean, I it came. I was able to get the arc, I think, on Tuesday or Wednesday, and then and cranked it out Friday,
Thank
Saturday, and last night. I just when I had time to do those things. So it reads, I think, wonderfully well, and I think it reads in the world um, that you've created of We Are Liars really well as well.
you.
So I think that's going to be fun. Well, Emily, it's certainly been great to talk with you, and I'm so excited to be able to have got this interview done before the we We Were Liars comes out on Prime Video. I will tell everyone I know. I've actually talked to that author. You know,
Thank you. I appreciate you doing it to line up with the launch of the show.
oh yeah, I think it'll be fun, and I think that I hope it was a good time for you. I hope you had a good experience as the writer of one of these limited series. And are you satisfied and happy with all the actors and how the book came to screen? Or
I
do you see them
Yeah,
as different entities now?
they're very different entities, but the core story is the same
Yeah,
story. A
yeah,
lot of things are fleshed out,
yeah,
made deeper. There's like new bits of mystery and people have new secrets and things like that. But the core story is the same. And the actors are so good. We have a really, really great cast.
that's great. It will have people look forward to it. Well, anything new on the horizon that you can talk about yet besides We Fell Apart?
Not really. We Fell Apart is the next big thing for me.
Okay.
It's coming from when we're recording this, it's coming out in like 5 months. So you're
Yeah.
one of the first readers.
Oh, yeah, I feel really good about that because I would have a lot of good things to say about it already. Um, it's I'm going to leave you with one compliment that I was surprised me one day. I was at LSU and we were having a summit, and it was 2014, and I just read We Were Liars a few weeks before, and Matt De La Pena was one of the guests, and in my opening keynote, I was talking about the value of young adult literature and quality young adult literature. And I said, I just read a book I think that for me will be part of, if we were talking about a canon of young adult literature, I said I wouldn't be surprised if We Were Liars is one of these books that we're looking at a decade later. And I said, I think I think at the time I said, I think it's the best thing E Lockhart has written, and I like a lot of her stuff before, and and that went on. So I did that, and after my keynote was over, there was some downtime, and Matt came over and he goes, "Well, I got to disagree with you." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Don't you think We Were Liars is great?" He says, "I think it's great, but I don't think it's the best thing she's ever written because I think the best thing she's ever written is still inside of her." And I thought, oh, good for you. So Matt not only loved the book, he could see you writing yet other profound books. And I think for people who don't know it, Family of Liars doesn't disappoint. It's a great follow-up book. And
Thank you.
and Genuine Fraud, which we talked about, is another great book. So as I was reading, Matt set me up. So as I'm reading every book after We Were Liars, I have to say, okay, is there another step? Is Matt right? Is Matt
I hope
on
he's
this?
right.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right. I think you've proven that with the things that have come after We Were Liars, that you're a writer who continues to produce and show up with great books. So let's all get people reading them more and more, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been a treat to talk to you.
Thanks, Emily. We'll see you around the next corner.
Okay.